The first experiential learning activity that is due, the paper that is due for this semester, is the sexual history interview activity and paper. And so this is one that is a bit of a group assignment. You're getting grouped up with other students, and then you're going to write your paper just by yourself. And so every student is going to submit a paper based on their experience, but you're going to be working on the experience with other students. And so at the beginning of the semester, I'm going to be posting up a list that partners you with two other of your classmates. So you're going to be in groups of three. When you engage in this activity, you want each interview to be no more than an hour per person. And so you're going to engage in up to 3 hours of interview time in that trio. In the trio, you're going to take part as one part in one of the roles for each of those hours in each of those interviews. And so for one interview, you're going to be the interviewer asking the questions. For another interview, you're going to be the interviewee answering the questions. And then in the third one, you're going to be an observer, a silent observer. Because of safety precautions and COVID, these can take place online. You can use Zoom format or some other FaceTime type of app to do these. Um, in person is okay if you feel safe with that, but certainly we want to make sure that you're being safe. It would be best to do them so that you could see each other versus just on the phone, because in our counseling relationships, we're mostly going to be face to face in some way, whether it's virtual or in person. And we want to include body language, both your own and the others, and as the observer, both of the interviewee and interviewers in your reflections. And so being able to see the other people is important. So, what are you going to do in these roles? Inside of the syllabus and also in the assignment prompt is a list of questions. You do not have to cover all of the questions, and in some cases, you may not be able to fit all of those questions into that hour. Um, I Ideally, it would be good to kind of cover some of the questions in each of the areas. And as we go over the roles of interviewer, interviewee, and observer, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the selection of questions in that. After you complete all of the interviews should not be recorded. And in your paper about the interview, you should not be disclosing other people's information directly. You can say, the person that I interviewed brought up this topic or answered in this way, and this is how I'm feeling in talking about that, or I was surprised that they brought that up, things like that. But you don't want to specifically out them in your paper. In writing your paper, listed on the assignment prompt and in your syllabus are 5 questions to be thinking about. What are the overt and covert messages, positive or negative, in the interviewee's family regarding sexuality, gender roles? How was sexuality and intimacy encouraged or discouraged? What sexual transaction patterns can be identified? What has changed over time about those patterns, and what has endured? What patterns persist in the interviewee's present experience, and what messages does the interviewee wish to communicate to their children or potential children about gender roles and sexuality and intimacy. And so just kind of thinking about those as you're going through the interviews and as you're writing your paper. Your paper should be 5 to 7 pages. With this interview, there's probably going to be a lot of information you want to cover because you're going to be talking about your experience in each of those 3 roles. And so that's going to, take a decent amount of space. It is to be an academic paper, which means it's an APA format, should have a cover page. It should be all APA formatting as far as margins, double spacing, font size, and font type. You may want to include information from other sources and or direct quotes, depending on what you're talking about. And so if you do include those, you want to cite them and add that reference page. So make sure those are included if you're adding additional information. In the paper, as the interviewer, there are some themes that you want to think about as you're writing that reflection. As an interviewee as well, and as an observer. And again, those are all written in the assignment prompt as well as on the syllabus. And you can take a look at them when you have an opportunity and as you're writing the paper. Now, with this being an academic paper, you want to make sure that there's a really good introduction and conclusion to your paper as well, and not just kind of like get into your reflections. Again, this is an academic paper and should be written like one. So write a good introduction to your paper, what you're going to explore, where you're kind of at, talk about your three different roles and the reflections on them, and then kind of a nice conclusion to finish up the paper. All right, so to talk a little bit more about these roles. So first of all, when you're in your group of three, I'm going to sort of randomly select you to be together. And so what I'm hoping though is that you're not with your closest of friends, because these may be topics that you feel comfortable talking with your friends about, or you've maybe talked already about these topics with them. And so sometimes it feels really uncomfortable when you're doing something like this with people you don't know. And the idea is that as an interviewer, especially, it should be kind of like you're interviewing a client, someone that you wouldn't know and wouldn't have an established relationship with. And so, coming from that perspective, it is helpful to interview someone that you don't know quite as well. Um, and kind of help you to get used to asking these questions, bringing up these topics, and hearing what the responses are from the interviewee. As I talked about before, there are some questions that you might end up skipping or not getting to. This is more of the decision of the interviewee versus the interviewer. So, as the interviewer, if you're like, oh, I don't want to ask that question, I think I should skip it, then chances are you probably should ask that question so that you could get more comfort in doing so. And so, I definitely encourage you as the interviewer to put yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit and ask those challenging questions so that you have practice at doing it. Now, if it is something that is truly triggering or harmful to you, obviously, I don't want you to be unsafe. I don't want to put you in that situation. However, I want you to be honest with yourself. What can I do and what ways can I challenge myself that are safe and healthy for me? In the role of interviewee, it might be difficult for you to feel like I am opening up about all of this personal stuff to classmates, people that maybe I've had classes with before and will continue to have classes with. I maybe don't feel quite as safe sharing some of this information, and that's okay. At the beginning of the interview, you may state some things that you don't want to be asked about, and that's okay. And the interviewer should respect that. Also, as the interviewer is asking questions, if they ask a question that you don't quite feel comfortable at answering, you can simply say, can we skip this question? Or I don't feel comfortable answering that question. And that's okay. You can definitely hold back on the information that you don't feel okay with sharing. It's still going to give the interviewer a great experience because in many cases there's going to be clients who give us those same responses, and we need to know how to deal with that and manage that. And it could be a great reflection. Like, I was surprised that my interviewee asked to skip that question. It really made me curious as to why. However, I knew that pushing them was not going to be a good thing, and safe for them. Finally, as the observer, you're a silent observer. You're simply watching for body language, tone of voice, what happens when questions are asked, how comfortable does the interviewer appear or not appear, what ways do they help the interviewee feel more or less comfortable in a given time period, and how does the interviewee respond to them. And so you're going to have this inside look at how the interview plays out because you're going to be sitting on the outside of it. If you're doing this via electronic, like online means like Zoom or something, you can always like turn off your camera and mute yourself so that you like really kind of disappear a little bit. Things like that. In person, obviously, I know that's a little bit harder. But there are ways to kind of put yourself in a position where the other person doesn't feel as much like they're being watched. But you can kind of play with that and do that how you want to. So with this assignment, there is also a rubric that you want to make sure you take a look at. So when you look in the assignment prompt on Canvas, it is all of the information I just went over, all of the information that's in the syllabus. And then at the very bottom, you will see the rubric. Scroll down there. This assignment is also worth 200 points, as well as the other experiential learning activity is 200 points. These are broken down into 5 categories. And so the first is the interviewer reflection. And so this is where you talk about your experience as the interviewer. Next is the interviewee reflection. Obviously, this is where you talk about your reflection as in the role of the interviewee. And then finally, observer. What is your reflection on that role? Finally, the personal, or not finally, excuse me, the fourth one is the personal reflection, worth 45 points as well. And this is where you get into that introduction and conclusion of the paper, and you just kind of talk about the experience overall, how, like, what kind of mind frame are you going in with? What are you coming out with? Stuff like that. What do you wish you had done different? What are you glad you did the same? All of those things. And then 20 points, the last 20 points are for appropriate APA format, and that explains all of those things that I already went over. Um, including spelling and grammar and all of that. And so that totals up to your 200 points. If you have any questions about this assignment, please let me know. Again, at the point that you may be watching this, you may already have a list of your partners. If there are any issues with the partnering, for any reason at all, someone in the class is an ex of yours or someone that you've had a really difficult experience with in the past, all of those kind of things, you can feel free to let me know, so that maybe I don't partner you with that person. But otherwise, hopefully the trios go well. And again, let me know if you have any questions.